117. Something to protect. Minerva McGonagall. The morning after had come, and all the students had gathered silently around the four tables of Hogwarts, Harry James Potter Evans Veres among them. He had collapsed in exhaustion last night and been awoken in the infirmary next morning, still muzzy, with the philosopher's stone underneath his left sock. The head table looked like a plague had swept it. Dumbledore's throne was gone from the head table, without replacement, leaving the center of the head table empty. Severus Snape was sitting in a floating seat, the magical equivalent of a wheelchair. Professor Sprout was missing. According to what Harry had been told last night, a court legilimens would examine her to see if any further compulsions remained, but probably no charges would be filed. Harry had emphasized to Professor McGonagall and the Auras as hard as he could that Professor Sprout was probably just a victim. The boy who lived had pronounced that he'd seen no evidence of Sprout's intentional guilt in Voldemort's mind. Professor Flitwick was missing, presumably still staying by Hermione's side. Professor Sinistra was missing, and Harry didn't know why or where. The numbness that surrounded Harry's mind was like a mylar blanket, protective if not comforting. There were scenes in his mind of black robes falling and blood spilling, appearing for an instant before being shoved back. He'd process it later, not now. Some other time would be better. Future Harry would have a comparative advantage at coping. Somewhere inside Harry was the fear that it wouldn't hurt, that there would be no price to be paid. But that fear also could be put off into the future. No breakfast had appeared on the tables. The students sitting near Harry were waiting in frightened silence. Owls had been prohibited from entering or leaving Hogwarts since early last night. The doors of the Great Hall opened once more, and forth came Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall. She wore robes of formal black, and her head was bare, denuded of its usual witch's hat. Her grey-brown blonde hair was done up in a coiled braid, as if in preparation for a hat to be placed later, but for now Harry saw her head bare for the first time. Minerva McGonagall came to the lectern that stood before the head table. All eyes were upon her. "I am afraid that I have much news," Minerva said. Her voice was sad within its Scottish precision. "And most of it is terrible. First, the reason I am the one to speak to you is that the headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus," her voice stopped, "Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore has been lost. You know who trapped him outside time, and we do not know if he ever can be brought back to us. We have lost what may have been the greatest headmaster that Hogwarts has ever had." A susurration of horror arose across the tables, no audible gasps or moans, just the sound of many intaken breaths, most from Gryffindor and some from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw as well. The ill news had already been known, but now it had also been said by authority. "Second, you know who returned briefly, but is once again dead. All that remained of him was his hands clutched around Miss Granger's throat. There is no more threat from him, or so we think." Minerva McGonagall drew in another breath. "Third, Professor Quirrell died with his wand in his hand, facing you-know-who. He was found not far from where you-know-who perished again, a victim of you-know-who's killing curse." Another susurration of verified horror, now from all four tables. Minerva drew another breath. "Last night, we also lost what may have been the greatest defense professor in the history of Hogwarts, his scholastic merits alone. Our defense professor has gone by many names, but his true name was David Monroe. As he was the last of the noble and most ancient house of Monroe, his funeral, his second funeral, and the true one, will be held before the most ancient hall of the Wisengamot in 2 days. Yet a wake shall also be held for the defense professor of Hogwarts, for our own Professor Quirrell, in this castle. That man also died a Hogwarts teacher, as nobly as a Hogwarts teacher ever did." Harry listened in silence, shoving down the tears that again rose to his eyes. It wasn't even true, let alone unexpected, and yet hearing it still hurt. From where he sat beside, Anthony Goldstein put a comforting hand over Harry's hand, and Harry left it there. Fourth, one piece of exceedingly unexpected and happy news. Hermione Granger is alive and in full health, sound of body and mind. Miss Granger is being observed at St. Mungo's to see if there are any unexpected after-effects from whatever happened to her, but she appears to be doing astonishingly well considering her previous condition. It should have produced wild cheers from Ravenclaw and Gryffindor if the news had come as part of any other package, or if it had been more unexpected. As it stood, Harry saw a few smiles, but they were brief. Maybe they jumped for joy earlier, but at the moment there was only silence. Harry understood that. He wasn't cheering either, not right now. Finally, Minerva McGonagall faltered, then raised her voice. I fear that I have the gravest possible news to share with some of our students. It seems that you know who summoned those who were once his followers, and many of them obeyed, whether from terribly misguided loyalty or out of fear for their families if they refused. A sacrifice was required, it seems, to complete you-know-who's resurrection. Or perhaps you-know-who blamed his former followers for his defeat. 37 bodies were found, more followers outside Azkaban than you-know-who was thought to have. I am afraid, Minerva McGonagall faltered again. I am afraid that among the deceased are the parents of many of our students. No, 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 as though by some terrible magnet. Harry's eyes were drawn to the picture of absolute horror that was Draco Malfoy's face, even as the comforting cotton wrap around Harry's thoughts was torn away like thin tissue. How could he have not thought? How could he have not realized somewhere in the background someone was already screaming, and yet the room seemed very silent? Sheila, Flora, and Hester Caro lost both their parents last night. Students who have lost their fathers include Robert Jugson, Ethan Jugson, Sarah Jugson, Michael McNair, Riley and Randy Rookwood, Lily Liu, Sasha Sprock, Daniel Gibson, Jason Gross, Elsie Ambrose. Maybe Lucius realized. Maybe he was smart enough to stay away. Maybe he realized that Voldemort was the one who struck at Draco, Theodore not. Vincent Crabbe, Gregory Goyle, Draco Malfoy. This concludes the list. One student sitting at the Gryffindor table let out a single cheer and was immediately slapped by the Gryffindor witch sitting nearby hard enough that a muggle would have lost teeth. 30 points from Gryffindor and detention for the first month of next year, Professor McGonagall said, her voice hard enough to break stone. Lies, shrieked a tall Slytherin who'd risen up from that table. Lies, lies. The Dark Lord will return and he'll teach you all the meaning of Mr. Jugson, said Severus Snape's voice. It was also faltering. It didn't sound like the potion's master at all. It wasn't loud, and yet the Slytherin fell silent. Robert, the Dark Lord killed your father. Robert Jugson let out a scream of terrific fury and turned to run out of the room, and Draco Malfoy folded in on himself like a collapsing house and made sounds that nobody heard, because the babble was starting up now. Harry rose 6 inches from the bench and then stopped. What would you say to Draco? There is nothing you can say to Draco. You can't go over there now and pretend to be his friend. You want to make it right. You want to make it better. But you cannot make it right. There is no way you can make right what you have done to him, what you did to Vincent, to Gregory, what you did to Theodore. The world blurred around Harry. He barely saw Padma Patil rise up and make her way toward the Slytherin table and Draco, or Seamus heading towards Theodore. And because Harry had read his father's science fiction and fantasy collection, because he had already read this scene a dozen times over when it happened to other protagonists, there was an image in Harry's mind of Mad-Eye Moody, of the scarred man called Alastor. And Mad-Eye's image was saying, in just the same voice he'd used to speak to Albus Dumbledore in memory, that the Death Eaters had been pointing their wands at Harry, that they had already chosen to take the Dark Mark, that they had been guilty of sins beyond reckoning and maybe beyond Harry's imagination, that they had foregone the deontological protection of good people and made themselves targetable if there was a strong reason to sacrifice them, that it had been necessary to save Harry's innocent parents from torture in Azkaban, that it had been necessary to protect the world from Voldemort. That plain old ordinary Aurors and judges had to do much more morally questionable things than killing sworn and blooded Death Eaters who were pointing wands at them, in the course of carrying out ordinary justices that were less clear-cut, but still necessary to society. If it were not right to do what Harry had done, if it were not right to do much more morally ambiguous things than what Harry had done, then society as human beings knew it could not exist. Nobody with common sense would blame Harry for doing it. Neville wouldn't blame him. Professor McGonagall wouldn't blame him. Dumbledore wouldn't blame him. Even Hermione would tell him it had been the right thing to do once she knew. And all of this was true. Just as it was also true that some part of Harry's mind had calculated that wiping out the blood-purist political elite would make it easier and more convenient to rebuild magical Britain afterward. It hadn't been an important consideration, but it had still been calculated in those instants of rapid thought, a check on the long-term consequences to see if they rated as catastrophic, and a decision that they actually rated as pretty much okay. And that check had forgotten that Death Eaters had children at Hogwarts, or that one of them wore the face of Draco's father. It wouldn't have changed anything. It wouldn't have changed anything at all. But that was the truth of the calculation Harry's mind had performed, given only seconds to think. At least Harry could, if the Death Eaters' survivors were in any sort of financial trouble, do something about that easily enough. Transfigure gold, and use the stone to make it permanent, unless making that much gold would be troublesome to the wizard economy at large, or cause objections from goblins who didn't understand market monetarist economics. Though it wasn't as though Harry didn't also have useful services to sell. Other cotton wrap was also being torn off Harry's thoughts now. It seems likely, Minerva said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through all other sounds, that some of our students will also have been stripped last night of those named as their guardians. Should you end up a ward of Hogwarts, please know that I will take the responsibilities of my position with extreme seriousness. You will be extended every courtesy. Your family's vault will be managed well and truly. As best I can, I will treat every one of you as I would my own children, and I will protect you as much as I would protect my own children, no more, no less. I hope that is clear to everyone at Hogwarts. Students nodded rapidly. Good, Minerva said. Her voice sank back. Then there is one more thing that must be done. With a sad, solemn air, Professor Sinistra emerged from a side entrance. She was wearing white robes instead of her usual brown, and instead of her customary witch's hat, she was wearing a many-tasseled square hat whose colors had faded into mostly gray. In her hands, Professor Sinistra carried the sorting hat. With the air of someone carrying out a ceremony that had not changed in centuries, Aurora Sinistra kneeled, on one knee, before Minerva McGonagall, presenting to her the sorting hat in both hands. Minerva McGonagall took the sorting hat from Professor Sinistra's hands and placed it on her own head. There was a long silence. Headmistress, as Albus Dumbledore is not dead, Minerva said, her voice so low that students strained to hear it, but only taken from us. I accept this position in the capacity of acting headmistress only until Dumbledore's return. A piercing cry split the great hall, and Fawkes was there, overflying all four tables in a slow spiral arc. He passed over each of the tables, humming in his bird's voice, a hum of absolute loyalty that would outlast the death of merely physical fires. Wait, the hum seemed to say. Wait until his return, and be true. Fawkes circled Minerva McGonagall 3 times, feathered wings brushing around her as the tears began to creep down her cheeks. Then the bird flew out a window above the hall and was gone. CH 118 will post on March 9th, 2015 at 12 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. UTC. 118. Something to protect, Professor Quirrell. The sun shone down on the Scottish green, striking sparks of reflected white from every passing dewdrop or reflective leaf that happened to position itself correctly, a clear blue sky for a funeral. Harry had declined to give the eulogy. He declined for the second time. Professor Flitwick had asked him about it weeks ago in May, to give Harry time to write his lines before it would become necessary to speak, and Harry had said no then, too. So it fell to a 6th-year Gryffindor, Oliver Habricker, who had the 4th highest total of Quirrell points among all the students, and who had been general of an army. The 17-year-old boy was tall and not especially handsome in solid black robes. Instead of a red tie, he was wearing a purple tie such as Professor Quirrell had sometimes favored, speaking, under the circumstances, ex tempore. The previous eulogies, written well in advance, had been discarded. Oliver Habricker had a parchment in his left hand, but he wasn't looking at it at all. Professor Quirrell was very sick, the tall boy said, his wavering voice falling into a hush of students, occasionally broken by a muffled sob. I think, if Professor Quirrell had been able to fight in the fullness of his power, you know who couldn't have beat him easily, and maybe not at all. They say that David Monroe was the only one that you know who was ever afraid of in his day. But, Oliver's voice broke, Professor Quirrell wasn't in the fullness of his power. He was very sick. He had trouble walking by himself, and he went to face the Dark Lord alone. There was a pause then, while the students cried for a while. Oliver wiped away his tears with his sleeve and spoke again. "We don't know exactly what happened," said Oliver. "I imagine the Dark Lord laughed at him. Maybe made fun of the professor for challenging him when he couldn't stand up. Well, he's not laughing now, is he?" There were fierce nods from the students, all of them that Harry could see, from Gryffindor to Slytherin. Maybe the Dark Lord knew some way of curing Professor Quirrell, who did come back from the dead after all. Maybe he offered Professor Quirrell his life if Professor Quirrell would serve him. Professor Quirrell smiled and told the Dark Lord it was time for them to play a game called Who's the Most Dangerous Wizard in the World. If you don't know, don't just make stuff up. But Harry didn't say anything. It was what Lord Voldemort might have tried. It was what Professor Quirrell might have said back. "And they aren't telling us everything," Oliver said, "but we can guess what happened next. We all know that Hermione Granger, who was one of the professor's best students, was killed by a troll earlier this year. It must have been the Dark Lord who made it happen, just like he framed her for the blood-cooling charm. Professor Quirrell knew the Dark Lord was behind it, so he stole Miss Granger's body and preserved it, kept it safe. Couldn't blame him for that one. Then Professor Quirrell went out to face the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord killed Professor Quirrell. Hermione Granger came back to life. They say she's alive and whole now, and maybe something more. When the Dark Lord tried to seize her, all that was left of him afterward was his burned robes and his hands around Miss Granger's throat. Just as Harry Potter was protected from the killing curse by his mother's love and sacrifice, Professor Quirrell willingly going out to face the Dark Lord alone must have called Hermione Granger's spirit back from wherever she was. Oliver's voice was breaking. "Not just like that," Harry said from the front row of seats, his own voice hoarse. He had to say something at this point before it got out of control, if it wasn't already out of control. David Monroe was a powerful wizard, more powerful than anyone knew except him and me. I don't think you can bring someone back from the dead just by sacrificing yourself. No one should try doing it that way. Such a beautiful story. It should have been true. It should have been true. "I don't know very much about the person behind the professor," Oliver Habrica said, after he got himself under control again. "I know David Monroe wasn't a happy man. He never could cast a Patronus charm." Tears were gathering in Harry's eyes again. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. Voldemort had killed so many people. He should have died along with his followers. He didn't deserve special treatment. But it hadn't just been Harry's weakness. It had been the Horcruxes. Voldemort couldn't have been killed outright. So Harry could admit it. He was glad. He was glad Professor Quirrell wasn't all gone. "But I know," said Oliver, tears glistening on his own cheeks. "Professor Quirrell is happy wherever he is now." On Harry's left hand, a tiny emerald glowed bright beneath the morning sun. "Not heaven, not some faraway star, not a different place, but a better person. I'll show you. Someday I'll show you how to be happy." The tall boy glanced down at a parchment he held in his other hand, the first time he'd consulted it. "Professor Quirrell," Oliver said, his voice now fiercer and faster, "was by far the best professor of battle magic that Hogwarts ever had. Salazar Slytherin couldn't have been half as good a teacher, no matter what spells he knew. Professor Quirrell told us at the beginning of this year that what he taught us would always be our firm foundation in the arts of defense, and it will be, forever. We'll teach it to the new students next year, no matter who we have for a professor. The older students will teach the younger ones. That's the solution to the curse on the defense position. We won't sit around waiting for authority to teach us, and we'll make sure that Professor Quirrell's teachings never die out of Hogwarts." Harry looked at where Professor No, Headmistress McGonagall, was sitting and saw the headmistress nodding silently, a look that was sad and stern and proud. "They haven't let us see Miss Granger yet," Oliver said. His voice quavered. "The girl who revived, but I'll always think of the defense professor when I see her. His sacrifice lives on in her, just as his teachings live on in us." Oliver glanced at where Harry sat, then looked down again at the parchment. "Here's to Professor Quirrell, then, the best Slytherin that ever was, what every Slytherin should be. 3 cheers for him." "Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!" No one stayed silent this time, not a single student that Harry could see. "CH. 119, 9,800 words, will post on March 10th, 2015 at 11 a.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. UTC. Note that the current chapter count goes to ch. 122. The current rap party list is as follows. See previous N for pages collecting them at hpmore.com/notes. Additional party notifications go to Habrika at berkeley.edu. Asia, Singapore, Mumbai, India, Colombo, Sri Lanka, Herzelia, Israel, Kharagpur, India, New Delhi, India, Australia. Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra, Europe. London, United Kingdom, Sheffield, United Kingdom, Brussels, Belgium, Krakow, Poland, Cambridge, United Kingdom, Belgrade, Serbia, Berlin, Germany, Turku, Finland, Madrid, Spain, Dublin, Ireland, Cologne, Germany, Copenhagen, Denmark, North America. Berkeley, California, Mountain View, California, Los Angeles, California, Phoenix, Arizona, Washington, D.C., Portland, Oregon, New Orleans, Louisiana, Sarasota, Florida, Gainesville, Florida, Denver, Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado, Lawrence, Kansas, Seattle, Washington, Mitt, Massachusetts, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 15th of March, New York, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Middleton, Wisconsin, Charlotte, North Carolina, Ferndale, Michigan, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Mexico City, Mexico. 119. Something to protect. Albus Dumbledore. Harry stood now before the gargoyles that guarded the the headmistress's office. He had been summoned by Professor Sinistra, told that it was an emergency, but the gates were not opening for him. Experiment had showed that the stone made one transfiguration permanent every 3 minutes and 54 seconds, irrespective of the size of object transfigured. Just once, holding the philosopher's stone up to the light of Harry's most powerful flashlight in an otherwise darkened closet, Harry had thought he'd seen an array of tiny points inside the chunk of crimson glass. But Harry hadn't been able to see it again, and now suspected himself of having imagined it. The stone had no other powers that Harry could detect, nor did it respond to any attempted mental commands. Harry had given himself until noon tomorrow to figure out how to begin using the stone without it being grabbed by someone else, trying not to think about what was still happening, what had always been happening in the meanwhile. 10 minutes late, Minerva McGonagall approached, moving in a swift stride. Her arms were full of papers. She was once again wearing the sorting hat. The gargoyles, with a brief sound of grinding stone, bowed low before her. "The new password is impermanence," Minerva said to the gargoyles, and they stepped aside. "I'm sorry, Mr. Potter, I was delayed." "Understood." Minerva mounted the long spiral stairs, climbing instead of waiting to be carried, Harry following behind her. "We are meeting with Amelia Bones, Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, with Alastair Moody, whom you have met, and with Bartemius Crouch, Director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation," Minerva said as she climbed. "They are Dumbledore's heirs as much as you or I. How's Hermione doing?" Harry hadn't had a chance to ask until now. Phileas said she seemed rather in shock, which I suppose is not surprising. She asked where you were, was told you were at a Quidditch game, asked where you really were, and refused to speak with anyone about what happened until she was allowed to talk with you. She was taken to St. Mungo's, where, the headmistress now sounded slightly perturbed. A standard diagnostic charm showed Miss Granger as a healthy unicorn in excellent physical condition, except that her mane needs combing. Charms to detect active magic have each time detected her as being in the process of transforming into another shape. There was an unspeakable who showed up before Phileas, removed him. He performed certain spells he probably ought not to have known, and declared that Hermione's soul was in healthy condition, but at least a mile away from her body. At that point, the senior healers gave up. She's currently alone in a cell with the rats and flies. She's what? I'm sorry, Mr. Potter, that's transfiguration jargon. Miss Granger is in an isolation chamber with a cage of tame rats and a box of flies that will bear offspring in a single day. Logic suggests that whatever mystery underlies her resurrection, it left behind an emanation that is causing the healer's charms to produce gibberish. But if nothing happens to the rats or to the flies' offspring, Miss Granger will be declared safe to return to Hogwarts after she wakes up again tomorrow morning. Harry still wasn't sure. Wasn't sure at all what Hermione would think of having been resurrected, at least under these particular circumstances. He didn't actually think Hermione would yell at him for doing it wrong. That was just Harry's brain trying to imagine her as a stereotype. Harry had been legitimately exhausted and not thinking very straight when he'd come up with that cover story, and Hermione would probably understand that part. But he couldn't imagine what Hermione would think. I wonder how Miss Granger will feel about having also vanquished you-know-who, Minerva said reflectively, climbing the moving stairs fast enough that Harry felt out of breath trying to keep up, and people believing the most interesting things about her. You mean, because she's always self-identified as a normal academic genius, and now a bunch of people think of her as the girl who revived, and everyone wants to shake her hand, Harry said, even though she doesn't remember doing anything to earn it. Even though it was all someone else's work and other people's sacrifices, and she's getting the credit. Even though she doesn't feel like she's actually done anything worthy of the way other people treat her, and she's not sure if she can ever live up to the person they imagine. Gosh, I don't know. I can't imagine what that feels like. Maybe I shouldn't have subjected her to it. But people had to be given something to believe, or heaven knows what they'd have made up. Feeling guilty about this would be stupid. I think. The two of them reached the top of the stairs and came into the office filled with dozens of strange objects, all facing a great desk and a mighty throne behind it. Minerva's hand passed over one of those objects, the one with golden wibblers, her eyes closing briefly. Then Minerva took off the sorting hat and put it on a hat rack that held 3 slippers for left feet. She transformed the mighty throne into a simple cushioned chair and the great desk into a round table, around which 4 other chairs rose up. Harry watched it all with a strange pang in his throat. He knew, without either of them saying anything, that there should have been more ceremony for the changing of the chairs, the changing of the table. Much more ceremony. For the first time, the headmistress sat down in her new office. But for whatever reason, there wasn't time, and Minerva McGonagall was discarding all that for speed. A wave of Minerva's wand lit the flue fire in the fireplace, even as Minerva sat down into the chair that had been Dumbledore's. Harry quietly took one of the chairs around the table, sitting at Minerva's left. Almost at once, the flue fire burned Emeraldine and whirled out Alastor Moody, who spun around with his wand raised, taking in the whole room at a seeming glance, and then pointed his wand directly at Harry and said, Avada Kedavra. It happened so fast, and took him so completely by surprise, that Harry's wand wasn't even half raised by the time Alastor Moody finished the incantation. Checking, Alastor said to the headmistress, whose own wand was now pointed at Alastor, her mouth open as if to say words she couldn't find. Valdi would have tried to dodge if he'd taken over the boy's body last night. I'll still need to check the Granger girl, though. Alastor Moody went to Minerva's right and sat down. Harry had thought, in that split second, to try producing a wordless silver patronus glow from his wand, but his wand hadn't been in place to intercept in time, not even close. Well, if I was feeling invincible before, that does for that. What a valuable life lesson, Mr. Moody. Then the flue fire burned green again and spat out the oldest, grimmest, toughest-looking witch Harry had ever seen, like beef jerky given human shape. The old witch did not have her wand in her hand, but she projected an air of authority that was stronger and stricter than Dumbledore's. This is Director Amelia Bones, Mr. Potter, said Headmistress McGonagall, who'd regained her poise. We are still waiting on Director Crouch. The corpse of Bartemius Crouch, Jr., was identified among the dead Death Eaters, the old witch said without preamble, even as she continued toward the chairs. It took us entirely by surprise, and I'm afraid Bartemius is in considerable grief about it, on both counts. He will not be with us today. Harry kept the flinch inward. Amelia Bones sat down in a chair, sitting to Moody's own right. Headmistress McGonagall, said the elder witch, still without hesitation or delay, the line of Merlin unbroken, which Dumbledore left to me in Regency, is not responding to my hand. The Wisengamot must have a chief warlock who is trustworthy at once. Matters are in great flux in Britain. I must know what Dumbledore has done immediately. Crap, muttered Moody. His mad eye was rolling wildly. That's not good at all. Yes, well, said Minerva McGonagall, who looked rather apprehensive. I cannot say that for certain. Albus, well, he clearly had an intimation that he might not survive this war. But I do not think he was expecting Miss Granger to come back from the dead and kill Voldemort only hours later. I do not think Albus was expecting that at all. I am not quite sure what his legacies will make of that. Amelia Bones rose half out of her chair. You mean to imply that the Granger girl may have inherited the line of Merlin unbroken? This is a catastrophe. She is 12 years old, untested. Surely Albus would not be so irresponsible as to leave the line to whoever happened to defeat Voldemort without knowing who. Well, putting it simply, Minerva said. Her fingers squared the paperwork she'd taken with her, now lying on the desk. Albus did think he knew who would defeat Voldemort. There was a prophecy concerning it, a verified one, which now seems to be in abeyance, or I don't know, Madam Bones. I have one letter for Mr. Potter that I am to give him in the event of Albus's death or other departure, and then another letter that Albus said Mr. Potter would be able to open only after he defeated Voldemort. I am not sure what will happen to it now. Perhaps Miss Granger will be able to open it, or perhaps it can never be opened. Hold up, Mad-Eye Moody said. He reached into his robes, drew out a long, grey-knobbed wand that Harry recognized. It was Dumbledore's wand, of a form and style not like any other wand in Hogwarts. Moody laid the wand on the table. Before we go any further, Albus left me an instruction or two of his own. Pick up this wand, boy. Harry hesitated, thinking. Albus Dumbledore sacrificed himself for me. He trusted Moody. This probably isn't a trap. Then Harry began to reach for the wand. It leaped up and flew across the table, into Harry's hand. And the moment that Harry's fingers grasped the handle, it was like he heard a song, a paean of glory and battle that resonated in his mind. A wave of white fire ran up the handle and over the wood, magnifying as it moved, bursting from the end in a tremendous spray of sparks. Through the wood beneath his fingers ran a sense of strength and constrained danger, like a leashed wolf. Harry was also receiving an impression of distinct skepticism, as if the wand had some level of awareness, and it was wondering how the hell it had ended up being held by a Hogwarts first year. Right, said Mad-Eye Moody into the puzzled stares. So it wasn't Miss Granger who defeated Voldy then? Didn't think so. What? Amelia Bones spoke the word flatly. Mad-Eye Moody gave her a respectful nod. Albus said this wand goes to whoever defeats its previous master. Took it off old Grindy, he did. Then Voldy defeated Albus yesterday. Do I need to spell it out, Amelia? Amelia Bones was staring at Harry, her mouth wide open. That might not be right, Harry said. He swallowed another pang of the awful guilt. I mean, Voldemort used me as a hostage because I was stupid, and Dumbledore gave himself up to save me. Maybe the wand thinks that counts as my defeating Dumbledore. I did defeat Voldemort, though. Vanquished him. But I think it's better if nobody has any idea I was there. Beep, tick, whir, ding, poot. That must have taken some doing, Mad-Eye said. The scarred man inclined his head slowly, a gesture of profound respect. Don't feel too guilty about losing Albus and David and Flamel, son, no matter how stupid you were. You won in the end. All of us put together never could. Just to check, son, you and David also destroyed Valdy's Horcrux, and you're certain it was the real thing. Harry hesitated, weighing up the probable consequences of trust, the possible disasters of silence, and then shook his head to Moody in reply. He'd been planning to tell at least McGonagall about what was now inside her school anyway. Voldemort had. Rather a lot of Horcruxes, actually. So instead I obliviated most of his memories, then transfigured him into this. Harry raised his hand and silently pointed to the emerald on his ring. Splat. Boing. Splat. Splat. Ha, Moody said, leaning back in his chair. Minerva and I will be putting some alarms and enchantments on that ring of yours, son, if you don't mind. Just in case you forget to sustain that transfiguration one day, and don't go hunting any other dark wizards, ever, just live a quiet and peaceful life. The scarred man took a handkerchief and wiped at the beads of sweat that had now appeared on his forehead. But well done, lad, you and David both, may he rest in peace. This was his idea, I'm guessing. Well done, I say. Indeed, said Amelia Bones, who had now regained her composure. We all owe the both of you a tremendous debt of gratitude. But I say again that there is urgent business regarding the line of Merlin unbroken. I believe, Minerva McGonagall said slowly, that I had best give Albus's letters to Mr. Potter right now. At the top of a stack of papers now lay a parchment envelope and a rolled-up parchment scroll sealed with a grey ribbon. The headmistress gave Harry the parchment envelope first, and Harry opened it. If you are reading this, Harry Potter, then I have fallen to Voldemort, and the quest now lies in your hands. Though it may shock you to learn, this was the end that I wished in my heart would come to pass. For as I write this, it yet seems possible that Voldemort may fall by my own hand. And then, in time, I shall myself become the darkness you must overcome to enter fully into your power. For it was said once that you might need to raise your hand against your mentor, the one who made you, who you loved. It was said that you might be my downfall. If you are reading this, then that shall never come to pass, and I am glad of it. Even so, Harry, I would spare you this, the lonely fight against Voldemort. I write this, vowing to shelter you as long as I can, no matter the final cost to myself. But if I have failed, then know that I am glad of it, in my own selfish way. With my passing, there is none left to oppose Voldemort as an equal save you. His shadow will fall long and terrible over magical Britain, and many will suffer and die for it. That shadow will not lift until you destroy its source, until you cleanse the heart of the darkness. How you are to do this, I do not know. If Voldemort knows not the power you bear, then neither do I. You must find that power within yourself. You must learn to wield it. You must become Voldemort's final judge. And I beg you not to make the error of showing him mercy. My wand, which I have left to you in Moody's keeping, you must not dare to wield against Voldemort. For when that wand's master is defeated, it passes to the victor in turn. When you have conquered my conqueror, then the wand will answer truly to your hand. But if you try to turn it against Voldemort before then, it will betray you for certain. Keep it out of Voldemort's grasp at all costs. I should advise you not to wield that wand at all, yet it is a device of great power, which you might need in some desperate case. But if you pick it up, you must fear its treachery at all times. In my absence, the Wisengamot will inevitably fall to Malfoy. The line of Merlin unbroken I have passed to you, with Amelia Bones as your regent, until you come of age or come into your power. But she cannot oppose Malfoy for long, not with myself gone and Voldemort returned to advise him. Soon, I think, the ministry will fall, and Hogwarts will become the last fortress. To Minerva I have left Hogwarts's keys, but you alone are its prince, and she will help you however she can. Alastor now leads the Order of the Phoenix. Heed his words well, both his advice and his confidences. It is one of my life's greatest regrets that I did not heed Alastor more and sooner. That you will in the end defeat Voldemort, I have no doubt, for that will be only the beginning of your life's destiny. Of that, too, I am certain. When you have vanquished Voldemort, when you have saved this country, then I hope you may embark upon the true meaning of your days. Hurry then to begin. Yours in death or in whatever, Dumbledore. P.S. The passwords are Phoenix's price, Phoenix's fate, and Phoenix's egg, spoken within my office. Minerva can move those rooms to where you can reach them more easily. Harry folded up the parchment and put it back into the envelope, frowning thoughtfully, then took the grey ribbon scroll from the headmistress. When the long grey wand in Harry's hand touched the ribbon, it fell away at once, and Harry unrolled the scroll and read it. Dear Harry James Potter Evans Veres, if you are reading this, you have defeated Voldemort. Congratulations on that. I hope you had some time in which to celebrate before you opened this scroll, because the news in it is not cheerful. During the First Wizarding War, there came a time when I realized that Voldemort was winning, that he would soon hold all within his hand. In that extremity, I went into the Department of Mysteries, and I invoked a password which had never been spoken in the history of the line of Merlin Unbroken, did a thing forbidden, and yet not utterly forbidden. I listened to every prophecy that had ever been recorded, and so I learned that my troubles were far worse than Voldemort. From certain seers and diviners have come an increasing chorus of foretellings that this world is doomed to destruction. And you, Harry James Potter Evans Veres, are one of those foretold to destroy it. By rights, I should have ended your line of possibility, stopped you from ever being born, as I did my best to end all the other possibilities I discovered on that day of terrible awakening. Yet in your case, Harry, and in your case alone, the prophecies of your apocalypse have loopholes, though those loopholes be ever so slight. Always, he will end the world, not he will end life. Even when it was said that you would tear apart the very stars in heaven, it was not said that you would tear apart the people. And so, it being clear that this world is not meant to last. I have gambled literally everything upon you. Harry James Potter Evans Vers. There were no prophecies of how the world might be saved, so I found the prophecies that offered loopholes in the destruction, and I brought about the strange and complex conditions for those prophecies to come to pass. I ensured that Voldemort discovered a certain one of those prophecies, and so, even as I had feared, condemned your parents to death and made you what you are. I wrote a strange hint in your mother's potions textbook, having no idea why I must, and this proved to show Lily how to help her sister and ensured you would gain Petunia Evans's heartfelt love. I snuck invisibly into your bedroom in Oxford and administered the potion that is given to students with time turners to extend your day's cycle by 2 hours. When you were 6 years old, I smashed a rock that was on your windowsill, and to this day I cannot imagine why. All in the desperate hope that you can pass us through the eye of the storm, somehow end this world, and yet bring out its people alive. Now that you have passed the preliminary test of defeating Voldemort, I place my all in your hands, all the tools I can possibly give you. The line of Merlin unbroken, the command of the Order of the Phoenix, all my wealth and all my treasures, the Elder Wand out of the Deathly Hallows, the loyalty of such of my friends as may heed me. I have left Hogwarts in Minerva's care, for I do not think you will have time for it, but even that is yours if you demand it from her. One thing I do not give you, and that is the prophecies. Upon the moment of my departure, they will be destroyed, and no future ones will be recorded, for it was said that you must not look upon them. If you think this frustrating, believe me when I say that even your wit cannot comprehend what frustration you have been spared. I will die or be lost by you, or in some other way be taken from you. The prophecies are unclear, naturally, without ever once knowing what the future truly holds, or why I must do what I do. It is all cryptic madness, and you are well rid of it. There can only be one king upon the chessboard. There can only be one piece whose value is beyond price. That piece is not the world. It is the world's peoples, wizard and muggle alike, goblins and house elves and all. While survives any remnant of our kind, that piece is yet in play, though the stars should die in heaven. And if that piece be lost, the game ends. Know the value of all your other pieces and play to win. Albus Harry held the parchment scroll for a long time, staring at nothing. So, there were times when the phrase that explains it didn't really seem to cover it, but nonetheless that explained it. Absently, Harry rolled up the parchment scroll in his fist, still staring at nothing. What does it say? Said Amelia Bones. It's a confession letter, Harry said. Turns out Dumbledore's the one who killed my pet rock. This is not a time for jokes, cried the elder witch. Are you the true holder of the line of Merlin unbroken? Yes, Harry said absently, his mind occupied with thoughts that were, by any objective quantification, overwhelmingly more important. The old witch was sitting very still in her chair. She turned her head and locked eyes with Minerva McGonagall. Meanwhile, Harry's brain, which was juggling way too many possibilities over way too many time horizons, some of them involving literally billions of years and stellar disassembly procedures, declared cognitive bankruptcy and started over. All right, what's the first thing I have to do to save the world? No, make it even more local. What do I have to do today? Besides figuring out what to do, that is, and I'd better not delay before looking at whatever Dumbledore left me in the Phoenix's egg room. Harry raised his eyes from the rolled-up parchment and looked at Professor, at Headmistress McGonagall, at Mad-Eye Moody, and at the leathery-looking old witch, as though seeing them for the first time. Though he was in fact seeing Amelia Bones for mostly the first time. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, whom Albus Dumbledore had thought worthy to lead the Wisengamot at least temporarily. Her cooperation would be invaluable, maybe necessary, for whatever was headed Harry's way. Dumbledore had chosen her, and he'd read prophecies Harry hadn't seen. Amelia Bones, who had thought she'd been appointed regent over the line of Merlin unbroken and made the next chief warlock, only to find that instead the position had gone to, apparently, an 11-year-old boy. You will now, said the voice of Hufflepuff inside his head, you will now be polite. You will not be your usual brand of bloody idiot. Because the fate of the world might just depend on it, or not. We don't even know. I'm terribly sorry about all this, Harry Potter said, then paused to see what effect, if any, this polite statement had produced. Minerva seems to think, the old witch said, that you will not take offense to honest words. Harry nodded. His Ravenclaw part wanted to include the disclaimer about that being different from people blatantly trying to push you down while crying that you were intolerant of criticism, but Hufflepuff vetoed. Whatever she had to say, Harry would hear. I do not wish to speak ill of the departed, the old witch said. But since time immemorial, the line of Merlin unbroken has passed to those who have thoroughly demonstrated themselves to be not only good people, but wise enough to distinguish successors who are themselves both good and wise. A single break, anywhere along the chain, and the succession might go astray and never return. It was a mad act for Dumbledore to pass the line to you at such a young age, even having made it conditional upon your defeat of you-know-who. A tarnish upon Dumbledore's legacy, that is how it will be seen. The old witch hesitated, her eyes still watching Harry. I think it best that nobody outside this room ever learn of it. Harry said. You don't think very much of Dumbledore, I take it. I thought, said the old witch. Well, Albus Dumbledore was a better wizard than I, a better person than I, in more ways than I can easily count. But the man had his faults. Because, I mean, Dumbledore knew everything you just said, about my being young and how the line works. You're acting like you think Dumbledore was unaware of those facts, or just ignoring them when he made his decision. It's true that sometimes stupid people like me make decisions that crazy, but not Dumbledore. He was not mad. Harry swallowed, forcing a sudden moisture away from his eyes. I'm beginning to realize, Dumbledore was the only sane person in all of this all along, the only one who was doing the right things for anything like the right reasons. Madam Bones was cursing under her breath, low, dire imprecations that were making Minerva McGonagall twitch. I'm sorry, Harry said helplessly. Mad-Eye was grinning, the scarred face twisting up in a smile. Always knew Albus was up to something he never told the rest of us. Lad, you have no idea how hard it is for me not to use my eye on that scroll. Harry quickly shoved the scroll into his mokeskin pouch. Alastair, Amelia said. The old witch's voice was rising. You are a man of sense. You cannot think the lad is able to fill Dumbledore's socks. Not today. Dumbledore, Harry said, the name tasting strange on his tongue, did make one wrong assumption when he made his decisions. He thought we'd be fighting Voldemort for years, all of us together. He didn't know I'd vanquish Voldemort immediately. It was the right thing for me to do. It saved a lot of lives compared to fighting a long battle. But Dumbledore thought you would have years to learn me, trust me. And instead it was all over in an evening. Harry inhaled. Can't you just pretend we've been fighting Voldemort for years and I earned your trust and everything? So that I'm not penalized for winning more quickly than Dumbledore expected. You are still a first year in Hogwarts, the old witch said. You cannot take Dumbledore's place, whatever his intentions. Right, that hole looking like an 11-year-old thing. Harry's hand came up, rubbed at his nose where his glasses lay. I suppose I could just use the stone, change myself to look like 90. I am not a fool, the old witch said. I know you are no ordinary child. I have seen you speak to Lucius Malfoy, watched you frighten off a Dementor, and witnessed Fawkes grant your plea. Anyone with wisdom who saw you before the Wisengamot, by which I mean myself, and at most 2 others, could guess that you had absorbed some portion of you-know-who's shredded soul on the night of his undeath, but subdued it and turned his knowledge to good ends. There was a slight pause in the room. Well, yes, of course, said Minerva McGonagall. She sighed, slumped a bit in the headmistress's chair. As Albus clearly knew from the very beginning, but thoughtfully declined to warn me about in any way whatsoever. Right, Moody said. I knew that. Yep, perfectly obvious. Wasn't confused at all. I guess that's close enough to the truth, said Harry. So, what's the problem exactly? The problem, Amelia Bones said, her voice perfectly even, is that you are a bubbling, unstable blend of a Hogwarts first year and you-know-who. She paused, as though waiting for something. I'm getting better about that, Harry said, since she seemed to be waiting on his reply. Quite rapidly, in fact. More importantly, it's not something Dumbledore didn't know. The old witch continued. Giving away your fortune and going in debt to Lucius Malfoy to keep your best friend out of Azkaban, as much as it demonstrates your upstanding moral character, also demonstrates that you cannot corral the Wisengamot. I can see now that you did the right thing for yourself, the thing you had to do to maintain your lease on sanity and hold back your inner darkness. But you also did a thing that Merlin's heir must not do. A sentimental leader can be far worse than a selfish one. Albus, master and servant of a phoenix, was barely survivable, and even he opposed you that day. Amelia gestured in the direction of Mad-Eye Moody. Alastair has hardness. He has cunning. He still does not have the talent for government. You, Harry Potter, do not yet have the sternness, the capacity for sacrifice, to direct even the Order of the Phoenix. And being what you are, you must not try to become that person. Not now, not at your age. Align and fuse your divided soul in your own time, if you possibly can. Do not try to be Chief Warlock while you are doing it. If Albus thought that was a good idea, he was crafting a nicer story at the expense of real-world practicality. I do think the man had a problem with that. Harry's eyes were a bit wide, listening to all this. What exactly do you think is going on in here? Harry tapped his head just above his ear. I imagine that inside you is the soul of a boy who remains honest and true, gathering his will to force down the fragment of Voldemort's spirit that tries to consume him, even as it howls at him that he is sentimental and weak. Did you just giggle? Sorry, but seriously, it wasn't ever that bad. More like having a lot of bad habits I needed to break. Ahem, said Headmistress McGonagall. Mr. Potter, I think at the start of this year it was that bad. Bad habits that chained into and triggered each other. Yes, those are a bit more of a problem. Harry sighed. And you, Madam Bones? Sorry if I'm wrong about this, but my guess is that you're feeling a bit upset that the line went to an 11-year-old. Not the way you are thinking, the old witch said calmly. Though it is natural for you to suspect me. The position of Chief Warlock is not one I will find pleasant, even compared to the horrors of magical law enforcement. Albus persuaded me on the matter, and I would say that I took some convincing, but the truth is that I did not waste his time in an argument I expected to lose. I knew I would hate the task, and I knew I would do it anyway. Minerva says you have some amount of common sense, especially when others remind you of it. Can you really see yourself standing upon the Wisengamot's high dais? Are you sure it is not some remnant of you-know-who that imagines himself suited to the position, or even desires it at all? Harry took off his glasses and massaged his forehead. His scar still ached a bit, from the damage he'd done by picking at it yesterday until it bled in a suitably dramatic fashion. I do have some common sense, and yes, being Chief Warlock sounds like a huge amount of aggravation and a job that in reality does not fit me the tiniest bit. The trouble is, I'm not sure the line of Merlin is just about being Chief Warlock. There's, I suspect, that there's weird other stuff that goes along with it, and that Dumbledore meant me to take responsibility for the other stuff, and that the other stuff is, possibly quite amazingly important. Crap, Moody said. Alistair Moody repeated, crap. Kid, should you even be saying this to us? I don't know, Harry said. If there's a user manual, I haven't looked at it yet. Crap. And if these other matters require sternness and sacrifice, Amelia Bones said, still calmly. If they test you as you were tested before the Wisengamot, I am old, Harry Potter, and I am not without knowledge of mysteries. You've seen how I was able to perceive your own nature at nearly a glance. Amelia, Mad-Eye Moody said. What would have happened if you'd had to fight, who last night? The old witch shrugged. I would have died, I expect. You'd have lost, said Alistair Moody. And the boy who lived didn't just take out Valdi, he set it up so that his good friend Hermione Granger came back from the dead at the same time Valdi resurrected himself. There's no way in hell or double hell that was an accident, and I don't think it was David's idea either. Amy, the truth is, none of us know what the keeper of Merlin's legacy has to do, but we're not the right kind of crazy for this crap. Amelia Bones frowned. Alistair, I've dealt with strange things before, dealt with them quite well, in my opinion. Yeah, you dealt with the crap so you could go back to real life. You're not the kind of crazy that builds a castle out of the crap and lives there. Moody sighed. Amy, on some level you know exactly why Albus had to leave who knows what job to the poor kid. The old witch's fists clenched on the table. Do you have any idea of the disaster it would be for Britain? Call me sane, but I cannot accept that outcome. I have worked too long toward this day to see it fall apart now of all times. Excuse me, Headmistress McGonagall said, sounding quite precise and Scottish. Is there any reason why Mr. Potter cannot simply instruct the line that Madam Bones is his regent for the position of Chief Warlock, but not anything having to do with the Department of Mysteries, until he comes of age? If Albus could tell the line to appoint a regent only until Voldemort's defeat, it is clearly capable of following complex orders. Slowly, this unexpected hammer blow of common sense was absorbed by everyone present. Harry opened his mouth to agree to appoint Amelia Bones his regent for Wisengamot-related matters, and then hesitated again. Harry said. Madam Bones, I would much prefer if you took charge of handling the Wisengamot instead of me. In that we are agreed, said the old witch. Shall we let it be done? But there was a sort of frustrated dropping back of the others. What is the problem, Mr. Potter? Said the headmistress, in a voice that indicated she hoped it was nothing serious. I think there's a couple of things I might have to do very soon that could prove politically controversial, and in exchange for handing over the line's political power to Madam Bones, I'm going to want her. Cooperation on some things. Amelia Bones exchanged another long stare with Minerva McGonagall. Then she looked back at Harry Potter. I am indignant at your request, Amelia Bones said. Your hesitancy has told me that you are weak and unused to bargaining, and will probably fold if I push back. Harry closed his eyes. Slightly dark-tinged Harry opened them. All right, Harry said. Let me rephrase. I don't mean to interfere with your work on a day-to-day or even month-to-month basis, but I can't just toss off the final responsibility that Dumbledore left me. I'm not going to owl you bizarre parchments out of nowhere. There can be discussions first, but at some point I may have to give you an order. If you refuse the order, I might have to take back the line's Wisengamot functions and assume direct control. Can you handle that? And if I say no, said the old witch, slight the dark tinge, I don't have an alternative to you lined up. I could start by asking Augusta Longbottom who she thought might be suitable and work from there. But it may be important that we keep to Dumbledore's plan as much as possible, since I don't know exactly why he did the things he did, and he thought Amelia Bones should be Chief Warlock for a time. I'm not going to pull Merlin's name on you, but— No, strike that. I am going to pull Merlin's name on you. This might or might not be insanely important. The old witch thought for a time, her eyes going from person to person around the table. I am not satisfied with this, she said after a time. But the Wisengamot must be called to order soon. It will do for now. Slowly, the old witch reached into her robes and took out a short rod of stone, dark stone. She placed the rod on the table before Harry. Take what is yours, she said, and then do please give it back. Harry reached out his hand to take it. In the moment that Harry's fingers first touched the dark stone, nothing happened. Well, perhaps Merlin hadn't been given to melodrama. That could explain why his final legacy looked like a small, unassuming dark rod. If that was all that was needed for its function, that would be all that was there. Harry took up the line, frowning at it. I'd like to appoint Amelia Bones as my regent for Wisengamot-related functions. Then, the thought occurring to him that he needed to specify a stopping point to define a regency, Harry added, until I say that I've taken it back. Then Harry made a face. He'd been hoping for more from the line, but it was just a key to places in the Department of Mysteries where interesting things were kept, or to seals where Merlin and his successors had stashed things that shouldn't be destroyed but ought to be kept from general circulation. Aside from that, the line didn't do much. The line didn't let you bypass the interdict of Merlin either. No, not even if the fate of the galaxy was at stake. Not even if the person seemed sane, had taken an unbreakable vow, and honestly believed the world was about to be destroyed otherwise. Merlin had dreamed of a long run, a world that would last for eons, and not just centuries. The world had no reason not to last forever if the truly dangerous powers were removed and kept gone. Conversely, a single loophole in the safeguards made the world's destruction only a matter of time. Someday Merlin's line would pass to the wrong person. It could reject the obviously unworthy, but eventually it would pass into hands too subtly flawed for the line to detect. This was inevitable when dealing with human beings, and Harry needed to keep that in mind before he sealed something where future line holders could retrieve it. The disaster of its inevitable misuse someday needed to be outweighed by its benefits over the next few thousand years. Harry let out a sad, small sigh under his breath. Merlin, you idiot. Thinking that didn't unlock any final safeguards. There wasn't anything currently on fire in the Department of Mysteries, so Harry carefully placed the line back on the table. Thank you, the old witch said. She picked up the rod of dark stone. Do you know how I am to use it to call the Wisengamot to order? Or never mind, I shall just try striking the podium. That seems obvious enough. To the rest of the country, of course, I am the chief warlock so far as anyone knows except us four. Harry hesitated. Then he imagined the owls he would receive if anyone knew he was allowed to second-guess the chief warlock and what that would do to Amelia's negotiating power. Fine. Amelia tucked the rod back into her robes. I will not say it was a pleasure doing business with you, boy, who lived, but it could have been much worse. Thank you kindly for that. Harry was already feeling worried about the exact balance of power here from the way Madame Bones was acting. Others had, quite logically, deduced that it had been mostly David Monroe who'd planned the way to defeating Voldemort, which meant they were still underestimating him. It might take a crisis of some type, with Harry figuring it out successfully for once instead of screwing up, before Amelia Bones started to respect his authority, or believe in it at all, actually. So, Harry said, any weirdness for me that you would have brought to Dumbledore while he was around? Amelia looked thoughtful. Since you ask. I can think of three things, indeed. First, we don't have the faintest notion what ritual was used to sacrifice the Death Eaters and resurrect you-know-who. It corresponds to no known legend, and the magic traces from the ritual have been eradicated. So far as my auras can tell, everyone's heads fell off their necks due to natural causes, except for Walden Macnair, who was killed by magical fire after firing a killing curse from his wand. A very mysterious ritual indeed. She was giving Harry Potter a rather precise look. Harry considered this, choosing his words carefully. Voldemort had said he put up wards, so Harry had been confident of not being observed by time-turned auras, but still. I think this is a matter you don't need to investigate too hard, Madame Bones. The old witch grinned slightly. We can't be seen to go easy on the investigation of so many noble deaths, Harry Potter. When I heard retold your particular account of David's last stand, I made certain to send investigators whom I considered reliable in the usual quality of their work. Aura Narbs and Aura Colon, in fact, who are widely respected outside my department. I found their report to be quite fascinating reading. Amelia paused. There's a possibility that Augustus Rookwood left a ghost. Exorcise it before anyone talks to it, Harry said, conscious of the sudden hammering of his heart. Yes, sir, the old witch said dryly. I shall disrupt the soul's anchoring a little, and none shall be the wiser when it fails to materialize. The second matter is that there was a still-living human arm found among the Dark Lord's things. Bellatrix, Harry said. His mind had leaped back, made the connection that ongoing trauma had blurred. I think that's Bellatrix Black's arm. Lesseth Lestrange hadn't been named as someone who'd lost a parent. Oh, bloody hell. She's still out there, isn't she? Can you use her arm to track her down somehow? Amelia Bones had acquired a sour look. I see. As I was saying, a still-living human arm was found among the Dark Lord's things, but it proved to be easily incinerated. What idiot? Harry stopped himself. No, not an idiot. Because immediately destroying dark objects is department policy, because of past experiences with rings that really should have been dropped into volcanoes immediately. Right. Moody and Amelia nodded in unison. Good guess, son, said Moody. It might seem literarily inevitable that Harry's past stupidity was going to come back and haunt him in some horrible fashion later, but that was no reason not to try subverting the plot. I expect you've thought of this already, Harry said, but the obvious next step is to put out your equivalent of an international bulletin for a thin witch missing her left arm. Oh, and add 25,000 galleons pledged from me. Headmistress, it's fine. Please trust me on this, to whatever reward is being offered. Well said. The old witch leaned forward slightly. The third and final matter. There was one truly puzzling element to last night's events, and I am curious to see what you make of it, Harry Potter. Found among the corpses was the head and the body of Sirius Black. What? Yelled Moody, starting half from his chair. I thought he was in Azkaban. So he is, said Madame Bones. We checked that at once. The Azkaban guards reported that Sirius Black was still in his cell. Black's head and body have been transported to the St. Mungo's morgue and show the same cause of death as the other Death Eaters. That is to say, His head spontaneously fell off. I am also told that Sirius Black is, as of this morning, sitting in the corner of his cell, rocking back and forth with his head between his hands. No other duplicate Death Eaters have been found. Yet. There was a pause filled with ticking and whooping things as people considered this. Ah, said Minerva. That's not possible even by you-know-whose standards of possibility, is it? I would have thought so too when I was your age, dear, said Amelia. It is the sixth strangest thing I have ever seen. You see, son, said Moody. This sort of thing is why nobody, even me, can ever be paranoid enough. The scarred man tilted his head, looking thoughtful, as his bright blue eye kept ever roving. Twin brother, concealed from the rest of the world, Walpurga Black gave birth to twins, couldn't bear to kill one, knew old Pollux would demand it. Nah, ain't buying it. Any ideas, Mr. Potter? Said Amelia Bones. Or is this another matter into which my department should not inquire too closely? Harry closed his eyes and thought. Sirius Black had hunted down Peter Pettigrew instead of fleeing the country as common sense would have suggested. Black had been found in the middle of the street, surrounded by bodies, laughing, nothing left of Pettigrew except one finger. Pettigrew had been a spy for the Light, not a double agent, but somebody who snuck around and found things out. One of the conspiracy theories about Pettigrew had been that he was an animagus, since he'd been good at ferreting out secrets even in his Hogwarts years. Dementors sapped all the magic in their vicinity. Professor Quirrell had said something about a particular type of magic that rearranged flesh like a muggle smith reshaping metal with hammer and tongs. Harry opened his eyes again. Was Peter Pettigrew a secret metamorph magus? Amelia Bones's face changed. She made a single croaking noise and fell backward within her chair. Yes, in fact, Minerva said slowly. Why? Sirius Black confronted Peter Pettigrew, Harry's voice explained patiently, to force him to change shape and pretend to be black. By the time the confundus wore off, Peter was in Azkaban and couldn't change back. The auras are used to people in Azkaban saying absolutely anything to get out, so they didn't listen while Peter Pettigrew was screaming about it over and over again until his voice wore out. Even Mad-Eye Moody's face showed the horror then. In retrospect, said Harry's voice, which seemed to be operating entirely on automatic, you should have been suspicious when you managed to get that one Death Eater hauled off to Azkaban without a trial. We thought Malfoy was distracted, whispered the old witch, that he was only trying to save himself. There were other Death Eaters we managed to get then, like Bellatrix, Harry nodded, feeling like his neck and head were moving on puppet strings. The Dark Lord's most fanatic and devoted servant, a natural nucleus of opposition for anyone who contested Lucius's control of the Death Eaters. You thought Lucius was distracted. Get him out of there, said Minerva McGonagall. Her voice rose to a scream. Get him out of there. Amelia Bones shoved herself up from the chair, whirled on the flue stop. Everyone looked at Harry with astonishment, none more than Minerva McGonagall. Something else seemed to have taken over Harry's voice. There's 4 things we still need to discuss. An innocent man has been in Azkaban for 10 years, 8 months and 14 days. He can stay there a few minutes longer. That's how urgent those 4 things are. You, whispered Amelia Bones. You should not try to be this person at your age. First, I think I should look at the complete police records on every other Death Eater that went to Azkaban while Lucius was distracted. Can you compile that by tonight? Within the hour, said Amelia Bones. She looked grey. Harry nodded. Second, Azkaban is over. You'll need to start preparations now to move the prisoners to Nermingard or other secure non-Dementor prisons and to provide treatment for their Dementor exposure. I, said Amelia. The old witch seemed bent, diminished. I do not think that even with this scandal that the remainder of the Wisengamot will bend. And the Dementors must be fed, not so much as we have fed them, but they must be given some victims, or they will roam the world, prey on innocents. It doesn't matter what the Wisengamot says, Harry said. Because, Harry's voice choked. Because, Harry took a deep breath, steadied himself. He thought he could see the shape now of the immediate future, could see it stretching out before him like a golden pathway lit with sunlight. Was this also written in the book of time that I must not see? Because if I'm right about what comes next, then sometime very soon, Hermione Granger, the girl who revived, is going to go to Azkaban and destroy all the Dementors there. Impossible, spat Mad-Eye Moody. Merlin, whispered Amelia Bones. Oh, dear Merlin, that's what happened to the Dementor that Dumbledore lost. That's why they're afraid of you and now her as well. Her voice trembled. What is this? What is all this? If Hermione believes that death can be defeated, whether or not she could have believed that before, she'll believe it now. An authorized portkey to Azkaban would be appreciated. Harry's voice broke again. Tears were streaming down his cheeks. She can't die. I have her Horcrux. But Hermione doesn't need to know about that. Not for one more week. If she's willing to risk her own life to end this, though I think she might make her own way there. Harry, said Headmistress McGonagall. Harry was crying now, huge ragged breaths bursting from him. But he didn't stop talking. Somewhere out there Peter Pettigrew was waiting while Harry cried. Somewhere out there everyone was waiting while he cried. Third, somewhere just inside the wards of Hogwarts, in a highly defensible position, but where emergency cases can be portkeyed in from just outside the wards, there's going to be a high-security HH hospital with very powerful guards that have taken unbreakable vows. I don't care how much gold it takes to pay for the vows. It genuinely does not matter anymore. And Alistair Moody is going to design the security architecture and go completely overboard on paranoia without being constrained by a budget or sanity or common sense. Only it has to open soon. Couldn't stop talking to cry. Harry, said the headmistress, both of them think you've gone mad. They don't know you well enough to know better. You need to slow down and explain. Instead, Harry reached into his pouch and signed letters with his fingers and lifted out, his fingers straining, a 5-kilo chunk of gold larger than his fist from when he'd been experimenting this morning. It made a heavy thud as it landed on the table. Moody reached over and tapped it with his wand, and then his throat made an incomprehensible sound. That's your starting budget, Alistair, if you need money right away. Nicholas Flamel didn't make the Philosopher's Stone. He stole it. Dumbledore didn't know the secret history, but Monroe did. Once you know how it works, the stone can do one complete restoration to full health and youth every 234 seconds. 360 people per day. 134,000 healings per year. That should be enough to stop all the wizards everywhere, and all the goblins and house elves and whoever from dying, of old age or anything else. Harry was wiping away tears over and over. Flamel had more blood on his hands than 100 Voldemorts for all the people he could have saved and didn't. The whole time, Moody, the Philosopher's Stone could have healed all your scars and given you back your leg any time Flamel felt like it. Dumbledore didn't know. I'm sure he didn't know. Harry smiled shakily. I can't imagine you as a teenage witch, Madam Bones, but I bet it looks good on you. That'll give you more energy for trying to keep the Wisengamot from messing with me, because if they get the idea that the stone is something they can mess with in any way, tax, regulate, I don't care. Hogwarts is going to secede from Britain and become its own country. Headmistress, Hogwarts is no longer dependent on the Ministry for gold, or for that matter, food. You may reform the educational curriculum at will. I'm thinking we may want to add some more advanced courses soon, especially in Muggle studies. Slow down, said Minerva McGonagall. Fourth, Harry said, and then stopped. Fourth, begin preparations for an orderly takedown of the Statute of Secrecy and to provide magical healing on a mass scale to the Muggle world. Those who oppose this agenda in any way may be denied services by the stone. Harry's lips couldn't move. Not wouldn't, couldn't. With 6 billion muggles thinking creatively about how to use magic, transfiguring antimatter was just one idea. It wasn't even the most destructive idea. There were also black holes and negatively charged strange-elites. And if black holes couldn't be transfigured because they didn't already exist as magic defined that to within some spatial radius, there was just transfiguring lots and lots of nuclear weapons and black death plague that could reproduce before the transfiguration wore off. And Harry hadn't even thought about the problem for 5 minutes, but it didn't matter because he'd already thought of enough. Someone would think of it, someone would talk, someone would try it. The probability was as close to certainty as made no difference. What happened if you transfigured a cubic millimeter of up quarks, just the up quarks without any down quarks to bind them? Harry didn't even know, and up quarks were certainly a kind of substance that already existed. All it might take was one single Muggle-born who knew the names of the 6 quarks deciding to try it. That could be the clock ticking down to the prophesied end of the world. Harry would have tried to deny the thought, rationalize it away. He couldn't do that either. It wasn't a thing Harry Potter would do. Like water flowing downhill, Harry Potter would take no chances when it came to not destroying the world. Fourth, said Amelia Bones, who was looking like she'd been hit repeatedly in the face with a planet. What comes fourth? Never mind, said Harry. His voice did not break. He did not fold over sobbing. There were still lives he could save, and those took precedence. Never mind. Chief Warlock Bones, I've given the regency of the Wisengamot into your hands. Please use that position to announce internationally that the stone's healing power will soon be made available to all, and that meanwhile, all dying patients are to be kept alive at any cost, no matter what magic is required to do it. That announcement is your absolute priority. When you have done that, you may rescue Peter Pettigrew and tell your old department to begin preparations for shutting down Azkaban. Then please have someone prepare a full list of imprisoned Death Eaters and what was said at their trials, and whether Lucius seemed strangely uninterested in defending them. Thank you, that's all. Amelia Bones turned without another word and dashed into the flue like it was her own self that was on fire. And someone, Harry said, his voice breaking again now that it was all set in motion, and crying wasn't costing time, though the vast majority of total lives at stake had turned out not to be savable just yet. Someone has to. Someone tell Remus Lupin. CH. 120 will post on March 12th, 2015 at 12 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. UTC. Next long chapter will be CH. 122, posting on March 14th, 2015 at 9 a.m. Pacific/4 p.m. UTC. If you do not like short chapters, I suggest waiting to read 121-22 at that time. See hpmore.com/notes for the following blegs. If you are attending or supporting this year's or next year's Worldcon, I would like you to, next year, nominate H.P. Moore for Best Novel in the 2016 Hugos. Not this year. H.P. Moore will finish in 2015, so it's eligible for next year's batch of awards. If anyone can put me in touch with J.K. Rowling or Daniel Radcliffe, I would appreciate it. If anyone can put me in touch with John Paulson, I would appreciate it. The Machine Intelligence Research Institute is looking for at least one new executive and new mathematicians interested in technical work on the value alignment problem. If anyone can credibly offer to possible arrange production of a movie containing special effects or an anime, I may be interested in rewriting an old script of mine. And I am also interested in trying my hand at angel investing if any investor wants to ascend me to angel. Thank you. 120. Something to protect. Draco Malfoy. N. Farewell, Terry Pratchett. 1948-2015. Your characters were an inspiration to me, and now I can see how much they taught me about Level 1 and Level 3 character intelligence. That self-awareness often manifests as humor or as genre savviness. That an inner spark of optimization can shine just as brightly through characters who are told, but not shown, to be lowly and stupid. That intelligent characters can go along with a spark of goodness and light running through a story, rather than cynicism. I wish I could have met you and spoken with you about your methods. You are loved by so many, and surely at least one person who would tear apart the foundations of reality to bring you back. But your brain is dead and warm now, and so your story ends. Even if the stars should die in heaven, our sins can never be undone. No single death will be forgiven when fades at last the last lit sun. And in the cold and silent black as light and matter end, we'll have ourselves a last look back and toast an absent friend. The boy sat in an office near to where the once deputy headmistress had held court. His tears had run dry hours ago. Now there was only the waiting to see what would become of him, the orphan ward of Hogwarts, whose life and happiness lay in the hands of his family's enemies. The boy had been called to this room, and he had come because there was nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. Vincent and Gregory had left his side, called back by their mothers for their father's hurried funerals. Perhaps the boy should have gone with them, but he could not bring himself to do so. He would not have been able to act the part of a Malfoy. The feeling of emptiness that filled him up was so profound that it left no room even for pretended courtesy. Everyone was dead. His father was dead, and his godfather, Mr. McNair, and his fallback godfather, Mr. Avery. Even Sirius Black, his mother's cousin, had somehow managed to die, and the last remnant of House Black was no friend to any Malfoy. Everyone was dead. There came a knock upon the office's door, and then, when the boy made no reply, the door opened, revealing, "Go away," Draco Malfoy said to the boy who lived. He couldn't muster any force in the words. "I will soon," Harry Potter said as he stepped into the room. "But there's a decision to be made, and only you can make it." Draco turned his head toward the wall, because just looking at Harry Potter took more energy than he had left in him. "You have to decide," Harry said. "What happens to Draco Malfoy after this? I don't mean that in any ominous way. No matter what, you're still going to grow up to be the rich heir of a noble and most ancient house. The thing is," Harry's voice was wavering now, "the thing is, there's a horrible truth you don't know, and I keep thinking that if you knew, you'd tell me not to be your friend anymore. And I don't want to stop being your friend, but to just never tell you and always maintain that lie so I can go on being your friend, I can't do that. It's also wrong. I don't want this anymore. I don't want to be manipulating you. I've hurt you too much already. Then stop trying to be my friend. You're no good at it anyway." The words rose up into Draco's consciousness and were rejected from his lips. He felt like he'd mostly lost Harry already. From the games Harry had played with their friendship, the lies and manipulations, and yet the thought of going back to Slytherin alone, maybe without Vincent and Gregory if their mothers terminated the arrangement. Draco didn't want to do that. He didn't want to go back to Slytherin and live out his life among only people who'd agreed to be sorted into Slytherin House. Draco was barely sensible enough to remember how many of his real friends were also friends with Harry, that Padma was a Ravenclaw, and even Theodore was a chaotic lieutenant. All that remained of Malfoy House was a tradition now, and that tradition said it wasn't clever to tell the war's victor to go away and stop trying to be friends with you. "All right," Draco said emptily. "Tell me." "That's what I'm going to do," Harry said. "And then the headmistress will come in after I leave and seal away your last half-hour of memory. But before then, knowing the whole truth, you'll get to decide whether you still want to be involved with me." Harry's voice was shaking. According to the records I was reading through before I came here, the story really began in 1926 with the birth of a half-blood wizard named Tom Morfin Riddle. His mother died in childbirth, and he grew up in a Muggle orphanage until his Hogwarts letter was brought to him by Professor Dumbledore. The boy who lived continued speaking, words that slammed into what was left of Draco's mind like falling houses. The Dark Lord had been a half-blood. He'd never believed in blood purity for a fraction of a second. Tom Riddle had come up with the idea of Lord Voldemort as a bad joke. The Death Eaters had been meant to lose to David Monroe, so Monroe could take over. After giving up on that, Tom Riddle had gone on playing Voldemort instead of actually trying to win, because he'd liked bossing the Death Eaters around. Voldemort used me to try to frame Father for my attempted murder, then used me again to go after the Philosopher's Stone. Draco couldn't remember that part, but he'd already been told that he'd been used as a pawn alongside Professor Sprout, and that no charges would be filed. And then the last horror. "You," whispered Draco Malfoy. "You. I'm the one who killed your father and all the other Death Eaters last night. They'd been told to open fire on me the moment I did anything, so I had to kill them in order to have a chance at dealing with Voldemort, who was a danger to the entire world." Harry Potter's voice was strained. "I didn't think about you and Theodore and Vincent and Gregory, but if I had, I'd have done it anyway. My mind managed not to realize until afterwards that Mr. White was Lucius, but if I'd realized, I still wouldn't have risked leaving him alive, in case he knew wandless magic. The thought occurred to me long before that it would be pretty convenient, in terms of the political landscape, for all the Death Eaters to suddenly die. I always thought that the Death Eaters were horrible people, much more strongly than I ever let on to you, since the first day we met. But if your father hadn't been there, and I'd had a button that could kill him remotely, I wouldn't have pressed the button just for political reasons. The way I feel about what I've done, and whether there's remorse. Well, there's a part of me that's screaming in generic horror about having killed anyone. And another part that says that from a moral standpoint, the Death Eaters signed away their lives on the day they signed up with Voldemort. They pointed their wands at me first, blah blah and so on. But right now I just feel sick about what I've done to you. Again. I feel like, Harry Potter's voice wobbled a bit, everything I do only hurts you, for all my good intentions, that you've only ever lost things from being around me. So if you tell me to stay away entirely from Draco Malfoy after this, then I will. And if you want me to try to be your friend for real this time, without ever trying to manipulate you again, without ever using you again or risking hurting you again, then I will. I swear I will. The next Lord Malfoy was crying, openly in front of his enemy, decorum and composure abandoned, because he didn't have anyone left for whose sake he could keep it. A lie, a lie. Everything had been a lie. It was all lies piled on top of lies. Lies, lies, lies. You should die, Draco forced out. You should die for having killed father. The words only filled him with more emptiness, but they had to be said. Harry Potter just shook his head. And if that's not an option, you should hurt. Harry only shook his head again. The boy who lived pressed the Lord Malfoy for his decision. The Lord Malfoy refused to give it. He couldn't say it, couldn't bring himself to say it, either way. He didn't want the war's victor and their mutual friends to abandon him, and he wasn't going to give Harry the absolution he wanted, either. So Draco Malfoy refused to answer, and then the time of that self's memory ended. The boy sat in an office near to where the once deputy headmistress had held court. His tears had run dry hours ago. Now there was only the waiting to see what would become of him, the orphan ward of Hogwarts, whose life and happiness lay in the hands of his family's enemies. The boy had been called to this room, and he had come because there was nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. Vincent and Gregory had left his side, called back by their mothers for their father's hurried funerals. Perhaps the boy should have gone with them, but he could not bring himself to do so. He would not have been able to act the part of a Malfoy. The feeling of emptiness that filled him up was so profound that it left no room even for lies. Everyone was dead. Everyone was dead, and it had all been futile from the beginning. There was a knock upon the office door, and then, after a polite pause, it opened to reveal Headmistress McGonagall, dressed much as she had dressed when she was a professor. "Mr. Malfoy," his family's victorious enemy said, "please come with me." Listlessly, Draco rose up and followed her out of the office. Seeing Harry Potter waiting beside her gave him some pause, but then his mind simply shut it out. "Here's the last thing," Harry Potter said. "I found it in a folded parchment whose outside said that it was the last weapon to be used against House Malfoy, telling me not to read any further until the whole war hung in the balance. I didn't want to tell it to you before because I thought it might prejudice your decision unfairly. If you were a good person who never killed or lied, but you had to do one or the other, which would be worse?" Draco ignored him and continued in Headmistress McGonagall's company, leaving Harry behind looking sadly after. They came to the headmistress's old office, where she lit her flue fire with a wave of her wand, said to the green flame, "Gringotts Travel Office," and stepped through after a firm glance in his direction. For lack of any other option, Draco Malfoy followed. She lay in bed, feeling more listless than usual that morning, awoken too early with the sun just beginning to rise, though the direct sunlight was blocked by the skyscrapers that shadowed her house. A faint tinge of hangover gnawed at her temples, dried her mouth. She tried to be sparing with the drink, though she didn't know why she bothered. But yesterday she'd felt even more depressed than usual, like she'd lost something somehow. Not for the first time, not for the 100th time, she thought about moving to Adelaide, to Perth, maybe to Perth Amb, if that was what it took. She always had the sense there was somewhere else she ought to be. But while she could live a comfortable life on the payments the insurance company made to her, she couldn't afford luxuries. She couldn't pay to go gallivanting around the world looking for some place that fit her unsatisfied sense of belonging. She'd watched the TV for long enough. She'd rented enough travelogues to know that nowhere the VCR showed her gave her any more sense of rightness than Sydney. She'd felt frozen, stopped in time, ever since the traffic accident that had stolen her memories, not just of a dead family that meant nothing to her now, but memories like how a stove worked. She suspected, no, she knew, that whatever her heart was waiting for, whatever key needed to turn inside her to make her life begin moving again, it was one more thing she'd lost to that runaway minivan. She thought about that almost every morning, trying to guess what she was missing from her life and mind. Somebody rang her doorbell. She groaned, turning her head far enough to look at the lead alarm clock at the side of her bed. 6:31, it said, with the AM dot lit. Seriously. Well, that idiot could wait while she staggered out of bed at her own pace then. Stagger out of bed she did, ignoring the doorbell as it rang again, as she ducked into the bathroom and dressed herself. She clambered down the stairs, ignoring the ever-nagging sense that someone else ought to be answering her door for her. "Who's there?" she called to the closed door. The door had a peephole, but it was fogged over. "Are you Nancy Manson?" came a woman's voice, speaking in a precise Scottish accent. "Yes," she said cautiously. "You know," spoke the Scottish voice, and Nancy leapt back in shock as a flash of light came from the door and hit her, and Nancy swayed, putting a hand to her forehead. Flashes of light just going through doors and hitting people, that wasn't particularly surprising. "Would you please open the door?" said the Scottish woman's voice. "The war is over, and your memories should be returning shortly. There's someone here who ought to see you." My memories, Nancy's head was already feeling clogged, like she was about to start hacking something out of her brain. But she managed to reach out and yank the door open. There in front of her was a woman dressed as a perfectly normal witch, from black robes to tall pointed hat, and standing beside her a boy with short white blonde hair and wearing perfectly normal dark robes trimmed in green, staring at her with his jaw dropped and eyes wide and beginning to fill with tears. Green-trimmed robes and white blonde hair. Something warm stirred in her memory. She felt her heart rising into her throat as she realized that the thing that she'd been looking for these past 10 years might be right in front of her this very instant. Somewhere deep inside her, ice was cracking around her heart, the piece of her that had been stopped for so long preparing to move once more. The boy was staring at her, his mouth working soundlessly. A mysterious name came into her mind, rose to her lips. Lucius. She whispered, "The next update will be on March 13th, 2015 at 12 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. UTC. A good place to start reading Pratchett is with the book Mort."